Okay, well, I think it's actually 7. So it's 7:01, and I see that we have our participants trickling in, but I think we should get started. So welcome everyone to the Saving Mothers fall event. We are, sad that we couldn't be in person this year, but so excited for this amazing panel of speakers. And we can't wait to get the conversation started. So just to set the stage, we actually have a very short film. We went to our student chapters, our Saving Mothers student chapters, and we asked them all to answer the question of what is the most critical issue impacting women today? And this is a short clip of what they sent us.
Hi, my name is Tina. I'm a PA student, second year at Seton Hall. We've been asked to talk about some of the things that we think are affecting women globally. And I'm really glad we're talking about this. There's a lot of important stuff that needs to be addressed in order to get equity for women around the world. One of those things is access to birth control and contraception and emergency birth control like Plan B. Another thing is eradicating child marriage that's mainly targeted towards young women, and that really reduces their opportunity in life, as well as being extremely traumatic. Domestic violence and sexual assault, and education globally, and access to menstrual products, now that I think about it.
Hi, my name is Nicolette. I'm a second year PA student at Seton Hall University. I think there's particularly a lot of issues and adversity when it comes to women with disabilities, getting preventative screenings such as mammograms and pap smears.
Hi, this is Claire from Penn State's Saving Mothers student chapter. Some of the critical issues we feel are impacting women today are the inadequate access to free family planning services, a lack of diversity in healthcare, in health professionals, and a lack of adequate maternity leave for women around the world. Thank you.
Hi, I'm from Penn State. I think an important issue affecting women is maternal and paternal leave for new parents.
Hi, my name is Nina Feinstein, and I'm currently a sophomore at Brown, interested in public health and medical anthropology. And I think some of the most important critical issues impacting women today include gender-based violence and intimate partner violence. And I think it's really important for us to talk about all the intersections of race and gender when it comes to that, and also just to come together as a community and have really important discussions about these issues.
Hi, my name is Serena Golbus, and I'm a student here at UNC Chapel Hill. I think a big issue today is the rights reserving around abortion, especially in Texas, because I feel like it's limiting my right as a woman. Not that I live in Texas currently, but it's limiting the potential of what could be. And it's kind of scary to see all the things that are turning out, because it's fearing for my future and maybe my potential daughter's future.
Women today are impacted by reproductive health injustice, gender-based violence, and preventable pregnancy-related mortality and morbidity.
Hi, my name is Sydney Thayer, and I'm currently a student at UNC Chapel Hill. I think really just getting access to affordable resources, especially when it comes to feminine care, birth control, things like that.
Hi, I'm Kate Falter. I'm a sophomore at Chapel Hill.
I'm Anna, and I'm a sophomore also at Chapel Hill.
I'm Tara, and I'm also a sophomore.
I would say domestic violence.
I would say sexual assault
and unequal pay in the workforce.
Hi, my name's Kiana. I'm a student at UNC Chapel Hill. I think for specific to children mortality, I think something that I find dear to my heart is doctors not listening or not actually taking their patients serious, especially whenever it comes to the breakdown of race. I also think maternity leave is a big issue right now, paid maternity leave.
There are many things which impact women today. These range from educational opportunities, especially in low and middle income countries, to wage disparities in high income countries. One thing that affects all women is access to healthcare. We see vast differences in access to specifically maternal healthcare depending on the area. Areas which are at disadvantaged are low income and rural areas, and this is seen across all countries.
Sexism and gender biases are still impacting women in this world. An inferior status that is placed upon women has resulted in some of the most critical issues today, such as violence against women, the gender pay gap, and unequal quality and access to care.
Hi, I'm Allie from Penn State, and I think that something impacting women today negatively is the wage disparities between men and women.
Hi, I'm Jess. I'm a second-year PA student at Seton Hall University, and a major issue right now is the violation of women's rights in Afghanistan by Taliban policies.
Hi, I'm from Penn State, and I think a critical issue affecting women is accessibility to prenatal care.
My name is Diana Shemtov. I'm a second-year physician assistant student at Seton Hall. A critical issue facing women today is discrimination and dismissal by their healthcare providers.
Hi, I'm from Penn State, and a critical issue impacting women today is harassment in the workplace.
Okay. So I just wanted to start the evening. Well, first off, I want to thank our student chapters for sending in those great videos. We actually have many student chapters. We have over a dozen different chapters across the country and even middle schools that are part of Saving Mothers. So we're very excited about our student chapters, and that short film represented those who sort of were able to get us their clips as quickly as possible for this event. So, we really thank them for that. I want to just take a minute, and for anyone who's new to us tonight, I want to tell you a little bit about Saving Mothers. So Saving Mothers is a 501c3, and our mission is really to develop low-cost, high-impact programs for women. And these programs focus on reduction in maternal mortality around the globe. That's number one. Improving access to healthcare and reproductive healthcare for women around the world. And 3, improving access to gynecologic or surgical care for women in the most underserved areas. At Saving Mothers, we model these programs, and then we basically create the program model and work with other groups to expand the model to all kinds of countries all over the globe in order to have the most amount of healthcare everywhere. We this year have a new program here in New York City where we focus on racial disparity in maternal healthcare. But our programs consist of Guatemala, where we have the School of Power. That's led by our Guatemala program director, who I know is on the call, Jessica Oliveira, and her Guatemalan team, who also I think is on this video tonight. Then we have Kenya with our Maternal Continuum of Care program. That program has also been running for quite a number of years, and we have participants from our Kenya program here tonight with us. And we have the Dominican Republic, where we focus on surgical training. So just a brief intro here to the team. Our executive director is Lisa Gilligan. Our program director in Guatemala is Jessica Oliveira. In Kenya, it's Augustine, who is one of our local community health organizers. He's amazing. And our medical fellow, Pooja. I also want to thank our medical and executive boards, many of whom are here tonight with us as well. All right, so I want to get the conversation started tonight because I know that's why we're all here and we're very excited about that. So I want to introduce our fantastic moderator for the evening. She needs no introduction, especially if you watch MSNBC. But Yasmin Vossoughian is here tonight. She is the co-anchor of MSNBC's Morning Joe First Look. She's also an MSNBC correspondent. She covers
not on that show anymore.
No, this is an old blurb, huh? Who just set me up? But she is always on MSNBC anchoring all kinds of news. Actually, every time I turn on the TV, she's on doing various shows. And we know that she loves storytelling. She loves, really going out and finding these amazing stories and kind of sharing them. And she's a good friend of mine. So we're so excited to have her. And Yasmin, why don't you tell everyone your current show and introduce our fantastic panelists?
Well, thank you for that amazing introduction. Hopefully you haven't been getting up at 5 a.m. and watching you for the last year because I haven't been there. Thank God for that, by the way. I'm getting more sleep, a little more sleep these days. No, but I'm so excited to be here. I have a show on weekends, 3 to 5 on MS, and then yes, anchoring it seems every other day these days. But I think this is an incredibly important topic because of some of the issues that were laid out by some of those young students, which I think are so important. And I'm happy to be having this conversation with these brilliant women that a lot of times I get to talk to on television, but we don't really kind of get into the nitty gritty of things and to dig into the issues that we care deeply about. So I feel like this is an opportunity to do that at a really important time. And when you think about kind of this pandemic and what we've all been through, women, as we all well know at this point, have been disproportionately affected by this pandemic when it comes to job loss, especially Black and Brown women at that. And childcare also has disproportionately fell on the backs of women through that. And so there's kind of been this domino effect with women in the society right now, where all the gains that we have made leading up to, I would say, 2020 have subsequently been lost. You see what's happening across the country in states like Mississippi and Texas right now. Equal pay, one of the issues that one of the young women brought up. I looked up this statistic about Fortune 500 companies. 1 in 5 C-suite executives at Fortune 500 companies are women. 1 in 25 are Black women. Think about that disparity. And so I think a lot of work needs to be done in figuring out a way to rise back up, right? And I think this is the panel to get started on with it. So with that, I'll introduce our panel, Dr. Kavita Patel. I usually have a teleprompter for this, by the way, so instead I'm looking at my notes. Dr. Kavita Patel, fellow at the Brookings Institute and internal medicine practitioner. We have Joyce Vance, legal analyst for NBC and MSNBC, a law professor at the University of Alabama School of Law and former U.S. attorney in the Northern District of Alabama. Cecile Richards, American activist who served as president of the Planned Parenthood Federation of America and of the Planned Parenthood Action Fund. And then, of course, Tarana Shirazian, who is an OBGYN and who began this whole organization on her back, on her own. And so we are so thankful for that. So I think I just want to get started up with this panel and talk about, Kavita, I'll start with you, because you're at the top of my queue, and just kind of ask each one of our panelists, what is the most critical issue to you right now when it comes to women today? The same question that was posed to those young students.
I know. Thank you so much, Yasmin, and thank you so much for having me. I have been a huge outside fan of Saving Mothers, so this feels like a treat to be able to be on this panel with people who have taught me a lot of what I know. Cecile certainly, and others on this panel. Joyce is also in that category where I learn constantly. So I'll just say, and by the way, Jessica from Guatemala, I spent 2 years in Central America and South America, mostly doing kind of pregnancy and actually period and menstruation counseling and doing things with girls and women. And so I have a huge soft spot for Guatemala City. Anyway, so just to me, thinking about this like globally, the most important issue I can think of is lifting up girls and women for economic mobility, I'll call it, because once we can have some of that, and I'm just so worried because, as you know, as I watch COVID, so much of what I'm seeing in data is that the disparities are just getting worse and dramatically worse, not just in developed countries, but developing nations. And so if you think that we've gotten kind of setbacks generationally for economic achievement, educational achievement, and then access to healthcare, so kind of bundling those three things, that to me is just period. I don't know how we can even start to talk about maternal health outcomes and some of the issues that the students raised until we take a head-on look, kind of honestly, about what our role is. And we shouldn't see it as charity anymore. I'm concerned that there's a lot of like, oh, such charitable giving, girls and women, this is so wonderful. We have to move from a mindset of charity to necessity. So I think that for me, that's, I'm so excited and hope that anybody who's watching, listening, can take the challenge that I'm going to try to take on, where I get like a couple of my good friends to kind of really get more involved, because I think it's organizations like this one that'll help us move out of that charity bucket into equity.
Joyce.
Well, like Kavita, I'm sort of in awe of the other women on this panel, women that I learn from and find to be role models. And as the lawyer on the panel, I'm particularly impressed by the medical expertise and the ability to work with people, because that's not really what lawyers do in this space. Unfortunately, we're the people who look around corners and see all the horribles that are possible in the future. So I'm afraid that my role on this panel tonight is going to be a little bit of the Debbie Downer. The big legal issue that predominates in this space is the risk that some point later this year or early next year, the Supreme Court is going to do away with the rights that American women have enjoyed for almost the last 50 years to seek abortion and other reproductive medical care without fear that it will be criminalized, to walk into a hospital or a doctor's office and seek care. I am old enough, I actually grew up in Los Angeles, and I'm old enough to remember when Roe became the law. And what a monumental change that was in my own family for cousins who were a little bit older than I was, and for the adult women in my family. I'm not eager to go back to a world without Roe, but unfortunately, my job is to read the tea leaves in the Supreme Court. And the tea leaves look like perhaps they'll come up with a compromise. They'll tell us how much of our rights they're preserving as they gut them, much like this court has done with voting rights. It is a bleak outlook, and I can't pretend that it's anything other than bleak. And then the last thing I'll say in that regard is, although the prospect of losing abortion rights is bad enough, the problem may well be with the analysis and the rhetoric that the court uses in doing that, because it's possible, depending on how they cut the legal issues, that other rights could be at risk. The one that I think is of the biggest concern that we're sort of waiting with bated breath to see is the fate of contraception, and whether contraception somehow becomes outside of that zone of privacy that the court is willing to protect. So lots of really gloomy legal news on the horizon for this year and next. I'm sorry to be that person tonight.
Well, and that's why we're here to talk about how to raise women up amidst kind of that doom and gloom that we're dealing with right now when it comes to abortion rights. Cecile?
Yeah, well, I join my colleagues in saying what an honor it is to be here, and what a fan I am of Saving Mothers, and just congratulations for this incredibly important work. And this, I guess my comments will be somewhat US centric. So because I've spent the last many years dealing with US politics around the issues that we're talking about tonight. And I thought that the students did such a good job of, in many ways, just illustrating the breadth of what I think is really has kind of finally been embraced in this work, and that is a sort of a reproductive justice framework, which is like, it's not enough to have legal rights or constitutional rights if you actually don't have equal access. And so all the things that they talked about and that the other panelists have mentioned, I think are critical, because this all goes together. But if I were to say the one thing that I believe we have to have, that all of these other issues are related to, is political power for women and representation. And if we don't have that, any right that we get is at risk. And I think that's obviously what we're seeing. What was just mentioned by Joy in terms of what's happened, Joyce, what's happening with the Supreme Court is that we have a right in the Constitution. We actually have an issue, abortion access, that is supported by the overwhelming majority of people in this country, but we have no way to hold on to it because we haven't built the political power to maintain it. And I think that I guess that's what my obsession is now, is if the majority of voters in this country are women, with Black women leading the way, they are our best hope for actually building a more progressive country and politics, and protecting and advancing all of the things that I think we're going to be discussing on this panel tonight. But we have a lot of work to do to get there. And I guess picking up on what Kavita, what you said, it is important that we move from a concept of sort of charity, and that somehow good works and philanthropy will take care of what should be basic human rights and basic rights for everyone. And if I were to finally mainstream reproductive health care and women's health care and maternity care. These are not like sort of nice to have, but if women are going to participate in the workforce, if they're going to be part of building an economy, we have to finally get serious about the fact that having children, raising families is in the interest of everyone in this country. And the last thing I guess I'll say, because I am optimistic in some ways, many of the issues that we've all been talking about our entire lives, access to early pre-K, access to childcare support, elder care support, are actually in the Biden agenda if we can ever get it passed. And I think that is not only because of who we have as president, because we have an historic number of women and women of color in Congress who've been leading the way, and we have to support them.
Amazing. Tara, to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I will echo what a lot of our wonderful panelists have already said, that I am very concerned about reproductive rights in the US and about all the gains that we've had over, decades. And I'm also very concerned about the why, why are we losing sort of those reproductive rights? Who's in charge? Who calls the shots? And what that means in terms of what else we could lose in the United States. And I also think about all the women we serve globally. And in many of the countries where we work, there are no reproductive rights. There is no access even to basic contraception, let alone abortion care itself. So I've seen the results of that. I've seen women turned away from the hospitals for, bleeding from a back alley abortion. So I think, I'm very scared about what it all represents for US women and what, and sort of who is in power and, at what price to us will sort of what will be the price to women in all ways, in all sorts of healthcare ways. And then the other thing I will say, because, on this issue of women's health, which is really what I feel very passionately about, is that, maternal health in the US is also very poor overall. And in New York, where I live, maternal health care and disparity in maternal health care, that disparity is really high between Black and white women. So, I see it as a really big issue here for us in New York, and one that Saving Mothers is working very hard to level, to try and deal or address that disparity through programming and through empowering women, which is really what we do. So, there's a lot to talk about, and I think they're very complicated issues, but I'm so excited that we have so many amazing panelists here, and we can sort of look at it together and figure out ways that we can empower women, that we can support one another and women overall, and how we can, make sure that we continue to get the gains for women that really we should be seeing.
There's so many ways to dig into this, but I'm going to start with the topic that was the most pervasive amidst all of you guys, and that is obviously abortion rights. And so, Joyce, I'm just going to have you drill down a little bit more on how close are we right now on a federal level to the overturn of Roe v. Wade? Do you suspect, how close do you actually suspect that we are? When you look at the Mississippi case, obviously what's happening on a state level in Texas, and what you see happening, let's say 6 months from now?
Yeah, so typically the Supreme Court holds its big opinions for the very end of its term. So we may not see an opinion in Dobbs' Mississippi case until late spring, early summer. But I have to confess, I'm not optimistic it will be anything more than the pretense of protecting Roe if even that. There are a lot of different ways that the court could choose to proceed. They could, for instance, right now the standard for when you can get an abortion without restriction is viability. Cecile knows all this stuff way better than I do. And it's possible that the court could come up with a new rule saying, well, medical technology and science have advanced, and so viability occurs a whole lot earlier than we previously said it did. But it's also possible that they could simply gut the right. I just think we need to be prepared for the fact that the outcome is not going to be a good one. And it is a rallying cry to figure out what we have not done in terms of building our political power and our political capital, and what we're going to do heading into the midterms. This is obviously really ties up with this whole issue of, whether we have strong institutions in this country or not, and what might happen at midterm elections if there were to be Republican majorities in the House and the Senate. So it's a very complex issue with a whole lot of moving parts. But Yasmin, I think the short answer is, I think we're one Supreme Court term away from losing abortion rights.
Wow. So that's startling to me, Cecile. And speaking from your own experiences as the head of Planned Parenthood, how do you suspect life will become for a clinic like Planned Parenthood, for organizations like Planned Parenthood, for the women that seek out services, not just abortion services, by the way, but women's healthcare in general?
Well, I think on that last, right. I mean, that last point, Yasmin, is so important, because I know since we've been through this before when Texas, the last time around, the whole women's health case, when they tried to essentially shut down abortion providers, they did, but really the residual result was, of course, they shut down family planning services and all kinds of basic women's health care, because in a state like Texas, particularly if you're a woman with low income or live in a rural part of the state, often Planned Parenthood is the only affordable healthcare provider of its type. So the impact, and I know I'm speaking to experts here about how the healthcare system works or doesn't work, it's huge. I remember we just had reopened in El Paso, Texas, a couple of years ago after being shut down for years, and women came in to say they had not been to a doctor since Planned Parenthood had shuttered the first time. So it's everywhere. I will just say to what Joyce said, I too am extremely pessimistic about the Supreme Court. And of course, what I kind of worry about the most is that there will be some sort of like fancy, nomenclature that will mask or make very opaque the fact that we've lost abortion rights. Because tonight, as we're sitting on this call, Roe has been overturned in Texas. You cannot get a legal abortion in the state of Texas pretty much at all. And I just saw a report in the Times, I think this today, that I think women have gone to maybe 21 different states to try to get abortions. The real impact, though, of course, it's not on Planned Parenthood, it's not on providers, it's on the patients that we can no longer see. And, if you look at healthcare statistics, and I think this was being mentioned earlier, the loss of access to safe and legal abortion, as we know, wealthy women in this country have always been able to get an abortion, and they always will be. Where the women who are and pregnant people who are most at risk here are young people, people who with low incomes, people who live in rural parts of the country, people who work at Walmart and can't take off a week and can't put together the money to take themselves and their children to another state to have a safe and legal abortion. And so that, of course, that's the real crime. And lastly, as was mentioned, birth control. Look, it's the same story. You look at maternal mortality rates, access to family planning services, access to sex education, your zip code completely, and your income and your race are the determinants there. And it's symptomatic of a bigger problem in our healthcare system in the US, but it is most acutely felt, in my opinion, in the reproductive space, where you're layering on the fact that it is primarily women, many women with low incomes, and the shame and stigma around services that are basic healthcare services and should be in this country.
It's interesting because I think it's a little bit also it's very much, I should say, connected to some of what Kavita, you talked about, which is kind of trying to establish economic mobility amongst women, right? And I'll give you an anecdotal experience that I recently had. I believe I was in Louisiana. I can't necessarily keep track of all the places I have to go these days, but I was at an abortion clinic in Louisiana. And we were talking to women that were having to cross the border from Texas to an abortion clinic in Louisiana to seek out abortions because they had surpassed that 6-week kind of fetal heartbeat detection timeline. And these were women maybe that were like 10 or 12 weeks. And I swear to you, predominantly the women that I saw in that parking lot that I spoke to that were inside that clinic were Black and brown women. And as Cecile just said, these were not wealthy women that were able to get on a plane and come to New York and seek out an abortion. They were Black and brown women who did not have support at home, who likely had 1 to 2 children themselves already at home. They were young. They were 18, 19, 20 years old. They didn't have a lot of familial support. And they were having to leave their jobs, right, to seek out abortion care in a state like Louisiana. Maybe 1 to 2 to 3 days they had to be there because of that 24-hour rule that exists in Louisiana right now, where you have to, have your, I'm sure you guys know the rule, where you have to have your appointment, wait 24 hours until you seek out your abortion. So Kavita, I say this to you to say, this idea of wanting to seek economic mobility, if we are in a mindset now of wanting to, especially in relation to healthcare, of wanting to seek that out as a goal to raise women up, how do we do that when we continue to see ourselves falling backwards with these kind of, legislative, arcane legislation, like what's happening in the state of Texas? And the women that are being hurt the most are the women that have the least amount of economic mobility, right? The women that had the least access.
Yeah, it's so just putting kind of my policy hat back on. I mean, the best thing we can do, kind of notwithstanding this incredible legal hurdles that are facing Texas and the entire country, most likely, is expanding access. Again, something actually to touch on what Cecile said, something that Biden had proposed for states like Texas that did not expand Medicaid eligibility to be able to get people like just at least access is one step. It's not great, especially given what you just described, Yasmin, but that alone, just even the Medicaid access itself has been shown, particularly for women, to decrease mortality, not just maternal mortality, but mortality from other causes, and to also have kind of a spillover effect in the family, because Medicaid kind of obviously extends to the household as well. So I think that just to be very clear, like it all does come back to who we elect into office, how we have voting rights that are legitimate, and make sure that we keep elections kind of transparent and open, and do not marginalize the very same populations that are having to flee to other states. And then I'll just say something that, and I know, Tara, you've probably had to deal with this with your own practice and some of the students. We've been all kind of on the back end trying to think about, and Cecile, you might have also had to play a role in the past, but we've all been trying to figure out how can we, in lieu of not having kind of in-person services, there's a plethora now of like telehealth services to try to make the mail kind of order pharmacy option available. And it's been something that has kind of data collected in Texas has been shown that as the number of abortions have gone down, there's been an increase in access to telehealth services, which can then provide mail order pharmacy delivery, at least safely, to a woman's home. I'll just say, and I'm sure Tara can say this too, when I've watched a 10 to 12 week pregnant woman go through and have to deal with kind of expelling like the uterus contents and doing that kind of at home from medication, it can be very daunting. So not even having social support, because you can't bring that woman in and offer her that social support without feeling like you're going to get targeted, is another critical access barrier. So sadly, like we're finding ways to hack around something that we might not be able to ever get legal victory on. But I think even basic access, Yasmin, can actually afford some ability to step up and start not from zero, which sadly millions of women in Texas still have because they don't have access to health insurance.
And you talk about, and I don't mean to make this a negative conversation, because I am going to make the turn to positive eventually, but it's hard to, we will be saying, we're going to get to the how-tos in a moment, right? Because I know all of you guys can kind of help describe, prescribe that type of, how to raise up. But Tara, is the psychological ramifications to all of this, especially in the patients that you've been seeing, the women that you're surrounded with every single day. I know, as you speak near and dear to your heart, it's something that I use on television a lot, which is this idea of, maternal mortality, the disparity between Black and brown women and white women, 2.5 times more likely to die in childbirth. But you think about all of this, how women are disproportionately affected when it comes to these healthcare policies, and not only the health ramifications, but the psychological, which is also health, obviously, ramifications of all of it. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, I think, just to echo something that Kavita just said about COVID, COVID has further set apart these disparities. Basically, they further widen the divide between access to care, I think, for all women, but I think also between Black and brown women and white women, because, we're talking about some populations that don't feel comfortable, coming into the doctor, don't always trust the hospitals, don't trust the clinics. Now they're all shuttered, right? COVID has occupied, the main focus for everyone, and people are resorted to telehealth, and, they probably don't feel comfortable on telehealth. Do they have access to telehealth? Is that something that they can even do in their homes? So I think we see widening disparity because of COVID. We see disparity because of just the nature of historical healthcare services and populations and at-risk and underserved populations and how they view healthcare and the clinics and the hospitals. So that's already a disparity. So, we're just sort of widening the issues that many women face, and they probably don't feel comfortable coming in through telehealth. I don't know if that answered your question, Yasmin.
No, it did. It did. But I want to expand on something else that I thought about, which is, and I think both you and Kavita can talk specifically about this, but it's, how do you reconcile especially when you go abroad, you help women overseas? How do you reconcile what's happening here in the United States?
So I was
when you go abroad. Wait, let me. So I say this to say that obviously we do not yet, and of course we're waiting for the passage of Build Back Better, which will likely happen, it seems. There will be 4-week paid maternity leave. Yay! I mean, anybody who has had a child knows 4 weeks is like when your sutures are barely healed up, if you've had a C-section or anything else, or episiotomy. And we have the highest mortality rate amongst pregnant women in an industrialized nation, and the only industrialized nation not to have paid maternity leave on a federal level.
Yeah.
So how do you reconcile that when you go abroad and you understand how far behind we are?
Well, what I was, I used to go abroad, and I used to think to myself when I went abroad, oh my God, we're so much better in the United States because we, prioritize women's health to some extent. We have access to some extent. Here in many countries, there is no access. You can't get contraception, you can't get abortion. And then, and I used to think, well, it's because, basic women's human rights are not respected in many of the countries where we work globally. Basic women's human rights. And these days, I hate to say it, but I'm starting to think that basic women's human rights are really not supported in the United States either. And I think that is really something we need to think about, right? Like, why are women dying in pregnancy in an industrialized country that has resources? Why don't we have access to abortion care for all women? Like, who is preventing us from having those very basic rights met? Who's in our way, and what can we do about it? But I think
I have the answer, but it's not very tasty, so I won't say it out loud.
But it's a women's human. I honestly think you can put it all under women's human rights, which is how we talk about rights globally. We talk about who's in power, what are the basic rights? How can we prevent women from getting female genital cutting or suffering from fistulas? Or, you know, we talk about sort of these very basic health needs, basic human rights on the global stage. And sometimes I think maybe we need to be talking about our human rights even here.
Let's with that, you're going to help me pivot to kind of like, what can we do? Because we don't, you know, I wish we could actually talk about this all day, but we have a, you know, not a long time. And I'll start with this question from someone who's watching. Joyce, it's going to go to you. How can the Supreme Court gut Roe v. Wade when the majority of women in this country are pro-choice? What can we do to ensure our voices are heard by the Supreme Court? It's from Christine Fisher.
So I think the die is pretty much cast in the Supreme Court. The reality is that Supreme Courts are creatures of presidential elections, and women have maybe not fully appreciated that and understood that. It always seemed so incomprehensible that the rights guaranteed by Roe and Casey could be eroded in any way, that I think we're waking up to that reality very late. So does the Supreme Court react to rallies in the streets or other forms of protest? You know, probably not. They'll react in a very specific legal way. And like Cecile, I'm a little bit more concerned about the fact that they may put on the pretense of preserving Roe while at the same time gutting it. That's certainly the trajectory that they took in the voting rights area, and it wouldn't be surprising here. So I think the answer and the good answer to the question is this: women's rights shouldn't be different depending on where they live in the United States, but they likely will be after Dobbs is decided. Women in Alabama, where I live, will lose access because we have a personhood bill that will be triggered by a reversal of Roe to the full extent the Supreme Court permits, and abortion rights will go away overnight, like they will in much of the Deep South. In other parts of the country, they'll remain in effect. And of course, as everyone's pointed out, that has a differential impact on poor women and women of color, but it impacts all of our psyches equally, because it means suddenly we are less than, right? We are no longer equal participants in this society. And so I think the silver lining here is this situation will mobilize a generation of women in the same way that the need to get to Roe mobilized a generation of women. It's horrible that progress isn't linear, but we are going to have to accept that reality and sit down with our sisters, literal and figurative, and our daughters and our moms, and we are going to have to fight back and reclaim all of this. There will not be another option. The Supreme Court will not do it for us.
Cecile, I actually think this is a great question that someone else asked. With all of the possible changes in abortion rights, what are your thoughts of this administration doing something to ensure women have unhindered access to contraception, despite the ACA mandate? National insurers like United Healthcare ask women to try and fail 8 options before receiving their contraception option of choice.
Well, there may be some, I mean, there are more things perhaps we can do through HHS. And, you know, I trust the administration is doing that. But fundamentally, the problem is a political one, which is, so we just passed in the House the Women's Health Protection Act, which essentially would do what we need to do, which is to do what was discussed earlier, which is essentially say that people should have access to safe and legal abortion. They should have access to birth control. It passed the House. Not a single Republican member of Congress voted for this. Not a single one. And so this is, I hate to say it, but this is a political problem. That is the only, to me, the only solution. And we did good things under President Obama, in HHS and expanding access to birth control, obviously the ACA and stuff. And then a lot of things were undone under Donald Trump. So I think you can use, the levers that you have in an administration, and certainly Kavita knows this better than anyone, but ultimately we have to have Congress pass pass legislation that protects these rights. And so, I mean, if this is the time where we say like the good things I think we can do, if it's okay, it's not really answering the question, but I think one is we have to protect women, and this organization, that's what they're doing. And that's why it's so important to support Saving Mothers and organizations that are first and foremost taking care of our patients. Number two, we have to actually tell the stories, and also why it's so great to have these fabulous media people on here, because I'm from Texas. These guys have voted to end abortion access for years, right? They have done this with impunity because they knew ultimately the Supreme Court was going to declare these laws unconstitutional. But now the harm, the suffering, and all that we know is happening now to people in the state of Texas, women, pregnant people, their families. That's on their watch. That's their responsibility. And we have got to now illustrate not just that this is a constitutional issue, but this is a human issue that is affecting millions of people every single day.
So how do you do that? How do we do that, Cecile?
Oh my God. I mean, here we are with these two fabulous people in the media. This is what I have been haranguing on, frankly, since the Texas bill was passed, is those stories need to be, doctors can tell you the stories. There are incredible doctors right now in Texas who are having to turn away patients who know exactly what's happened. And some, as we know, are not turning away patients. We have to tell their stories if we can't tell the stories of the patients, because that's the only time that people begin to understand that overturning Roe, it's not about a constitutional issue. It's about literally going back to the days where young, healthy women died routinely in emergency rooms in our country, and that we will not go back there. But we collectively have got to use all the tools that we have, which we didn't even have before Roe, to get these stories out, because I tell you, this country does not want to go there. And if there was one thing we could do out of all this, and those of you, I'm happy to follow up with anyone in the media, these stories just have to be told, because this is not where Americans want to go. And then lastly, we have to vote, and we have to elect more women and more women of color who actually can represent what it's like to not only be pregnant, but what it's like to face an unintended pregnancy, and what it's like to not be able to get access to safe and legal abortion. Sorry, I kind of went on soapbox. Yeah.
No, it's amazing.
I love
that's
it.
what this is for. Soapboxes.
Okay.
Soapboxes. Kavita, what's the risk that a physician takes? I'm sure you read the op-ed from the physician in Texas. He was a 70-plus-year-old man recently who talked about how he performed an abortion despite the legislation that's in place now in Texas, because he knew what life was like before Roe. And but it's a risk. It is a real risk. But he is being lauded, obviously, for people that are on board for abortion rights as a hero for doing just that. But at the end of the day, as a physician who could feasibly see yourself in that type of position, that is a major risk for you going forward, despite whether you feel for or against the legislation that's in place.
Yeah, it's created. So I went to medical school and undergrad in Texas, and my family still lives there, and they're angry that I haven't stayed in Texas. And so I've talked to my medical colleagues, Tara's friends, a lot of us who are still in touch, because they're actually asking me, like, is DC going to quote do something? And I'm like, what is DC going to do? I think people really don't understand kind of Joyce's and Cecile's point of like how much is on the line, yet how little control it seems like even Congress has theoretically. And so doctors there's probably, I'm grossly generalizing, there's probably two camps of doctors, like some of the doctors that have been very public and said, we are here, we're going to follow the law because we have to, but we're going to do everything possible to be supportive and help people seek access, contacts in other states, things like some of the telehealth services, to Tara's point about getting comfortable if that's what we have to do. But then there are a lot more providers who are just scared, because this is something, when it comes to like the intersection of like legal issues in medicine, doctors do not want a perception that one thing could lead to the Texas Medical Board, could lead to licensure revocal, could lead to a permanent stain on health systems hiring you in the future. And that's literally what they think. And I've tried to say, and it's hard because
is that the reality?
Well,
the
it's, I mean, I'm going to let, Cecile and Tara can probably speak with better authority. Whether it's the reality in that the perception is such that there are serious consequences, even if people kind of talk about it as, this is puffed up. And the physician in the Washington Post op-ed, the two people who who kind of tested this theory, I think you may have even talked to someone who knew them, Yasmin. They basically said, well, we did it just to try. So
Yeah.
doctors see that, and doctors are risk averse. That's why we go into medicine. And so this creates now a cultural sense of fear that only makes everything worse, because what you're hearing and seeing in Texas are women who don't want to have that be 6 weeks. And so they're coming in super early, and doctors are like saying, we're not going to be able to detect anything right now. But they also don't want to be in a position to say to that woman, well, it's past 6 weeks. I don't know what I can do for you. They don't even want to be put in that position. So it's taken, I think it's created, I think you're touching on something, Yasmin, that has not been talked about enough, kind of created a cultural rift. And there are physicians who are very much kind of pro-life and are actually pleased with what's happened. And then there are a lot of physicians in the middle who are a little scared and don't want to get intimidated and just want to hunker down and not do much about it. And then you have people like Tara and Cecile's kind of colleagues who have been leading the charge, but it's on fumes, because I mean, you can't do anything when what are you supposed to do when all you can do is offer nothing to women and their families? And it's insane. And I think maybe, Cecile, you put it in, the majority of women seeking abortions already have children. So the ripple effects, we talk about the woman, I really want people to think about this like a wave of ripple effects, the devastation in like an entire household. I mean, that's very real.
Yeah, I mean, Tara, I'm going to let you go, but it's just to add on to that anecdotal experience that I had. I mean, you speak to these women that are seeking on abortions across state lines. I mean, these are women that were maybe getting ahead. They were finally making ends meet. They were finally able to manage, their then baby, now toddler. They're getting a grip on life. They're getting back to work post-pandemic, and then suddenly, bam. And all of it comes tumbling down once again. And then how do you expect them to get back up to zero, and then beyond that, to raise to attain economic mobility, as Kavita, you put it. Tara, I see your little hand raised.
Yeah, I think, I know, I love that feature, right? I think that honestly, we really need to change the conversation. So I'm going to put something else out there that I think is really, really important. When we go to global communities, we really take care that when we want to introduce something new, like let's say we want to introduce a new maternal health program, we want to introduce contraception, whatever it is, that we involve the community, that we educate the family, that we bring in the partners, that we really make sure that we are educating the entire community, because things will fail if we just target the women. The women don't have the power. The women don't have the say in many of the households. They don't get to make the healthcare decisions. They don't even sometimes get to make decisions about contraception themselves. So what I would posit is, what if we reframe the conversation in the United States, right? And I think people have talked about this before, or I've heard some conversations like this where, instead of talking about abortion, as a woman's issue, it is more a couple's issue, and the public health education and the public health messaging focuses it as a couple's issue, or as a couple's decision, or whatever, not a decision by the couple, but involve the partner, involve the men, involve the families, make it more about all of us instead of just men versus women, because I think clearly there are many men that support abortions, right? And that support access to abortion care. So we need to just figure out novel ways to rebrand abortion. We need like a really great marketing person who's out there, someone who can really make people think about these conversations in a broader way, that's more about, that's why I mentioned the human rights issue, more about it as a rights issue that affects all of us. So that we can gain more momentum somehow.
Let me play devil's advocate, because that's just my job.
Sure.
And Cecile, I'd like you to kind of come in on the back end of this. And I would play devil's advocate by saying, in a way, would you then be kind of cowtailing to men in a way, like we need to explain to them why having access to abortion is important, right? Because they ultimately need to come along if things are going to change. And then B, are we under the assumption that America, but is there also this assumption though that America operates the way some of these other countries do? We don't necessarily have the community and familial structure, I think, that some of these other countries have. You know, I mean, many of the women that I've spoken to that are in these situations, which I mean, I don't need to tell you,
Right.
don't have a
They
partner.
may not have support.
They don't have a partner. Their families are fending for themselves. And so, and I'm not saying it's not going to work. I'm just saying I'm playing devil's advocate here.
I just think we have to approach the argument in a variety of ways. And I think we should bring along, I don't think we're convincing those who don't, I'm not saying convince those necessarily who don't already agree with us. I'm saying there are a lot of men out there who believe in access to abortion care, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not just the women. So it's about sort of expanding support for women's human rights, women's health rights, right? These basic things that we all agree every person should have, right? So I don't know. I think we're just couching it as like a rights issue, regardless.
Cecile,
I'll just say, I think, look, one, men do support abortion rights in this country. They just don't vote on it. And that's one of our problems, is that until we're willing to say, you can't vote for somebody who's going to take away the right of people to make these decisions, because, and, you know, men, it's sort of, you know, not, and men have not, I do agree on the point that we need men who believe in abortion access and, you know, are pro-choice to actually act on that, not simply be that way. And I think that is a huge problem in this country. So that I don't deny. I think the point here in the US, at least, I don't want to begin to presume for the rest of it, it is an economic issue. And this is one of the things that is really hard, because you can't, you know, it's like, we beat an abortion ban in the state of Mississippi, Joyce, you know, which is not that different from Alabama, right? Where if you polled people, they'd say they're pro-life, but at the end of the day, they didn't want the government making decisions for everybody about whether or not they had more kids. And it became something that people would really relate to, not necessarily in the rights framework, but simply like, we can't have the government making these decisions for us, for families, for couples, for women, for pregnant people. And I do believe that's a fundamental tenet, and that is really, I think, in line with where the politics are today. And the other thing is, we have to make it real what the price is that people are paying for taking away their rights. Because up until now, to talk about Roe, to talk about the US Constitution, but let's talk about the Supreme Court, frankly, it doesn't move people. They don't really, they're never going to vote about the Supreme Court. I mean, maybe Republicans do, other people do not. We actually have to illustrate what happens when you take away the right of people to make their own decisions about pregnancies. And that's the work I feel like it is a critical piece to all of that, because that's where you get people to actually begin to pay attention.
So what does that look like? Though, do you mean? Showing the story of a woman, or what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, well, it's funny, Yasmin, because I know folks say, well, you know, people don't really like look at Texas and they go, oh my God, Texas, you know, those people, whatever. It's never gonna. But, you know, I look at what happened over the last couple of years, where in traveling through the Midwest, where people didn't care about the border. They never cared about immigration until they saw babies being ripped from the arms of their parents and their families, and families separated. And suddenly people could say, you know, actually, it may not be happening in my state, but this is something that matters. And the same is true with the Black Lives Matter movement. You know, folks were sort of oblivious until they had to actually watch what it looked like to have young Black men being murdered by police in our country. And I can't tell you what exactly the story is, but what we are relying too much on an intellectual discussion we're not talking about what is the real impact on medical providers, on communities, on families, on pregnant people. And to me, that is work that has not been done. And I fear we already know there are stories coming out of Texas, and there's going to be more. And if the Supreme Court overturns Roe, the estimates are that 26 states will no longer have abortion access, and there will be stories everywhere.
Do you think, Joyce, that Democrats took Roe for granted, and the Supreme Court, that they should be voting with the Supreme Court more in mind, and that they should not have relied on the fact that Roe would stick no matter what?
Yeah, so I hear what Cecile is saying, and I would say, just as a historical matter, Republicans have done a great job of rallying their voters around the Supreme Court. Even if you don't love the nominee for president, you must vote for him anyhow, or else we won't get to appoint federal judges, including the Supreme Court. They've been fabulously successful with that narrative in ways that Democrats have not. I think Democrats simply haven't pursued it with the same vigor, and that's something that might have made a change. You know, something that I really worry about. So before I became a political appointee, I was actually just a line prosecutor in the Justice Department for about 18 years. And I did our bombs and our arsons work. And that meant that if there was a bomb that went off at a clinic, or if there was a fire at a clinic, or even if there was an access issue, I was the person that they called, and I was the person that responded, like I did in a January morning in 1998 when I was 5 weeks pregnant, and then spent the next 6 months working on an investigation after an abortion clinic in Birmingham killed a police officer. But I'll tell you what tore at my heart. And Cecile, when you talk about narratives and we think about women who are the most in need, what I think about that morning is the young woman who was there to get an abortion with her parents, her boyfriend, and her boyfriend's parents. They were fundamentalist Christians, and they saw the bomb go off. They saw the police officer. It was a horrible, horrific death. And they instinctively pulled their car out and sped off because of the shame factor, because in the Deep South, it was still embarrassing for them, even though they were deeply supportive of her to do this. I think where we can do some work on the narrative, to Tara's point, is to think about just removing that shame and expecting men to be a part of that. You know, the Texas legislature, the Alabama legislature, they are not going to be our friends for some time to come. But I think that we can expand the narrative, and in doing so, develop people who will understand the importance of voting, the importance of advocacy, and how issues like expanding Medicare, or rather Medicaid, are related, that these aren't individual separate issues, that lifting women up lifts up the nation, lifts up our children. And I think maybe that's what we haven't done successfully, is to join those narratives and to make people understand how important they are.
So we do have to move on to the auction, but before we do, guys, I just want to give you all an opportunity to give your final thoughts. I mean, Tara's like strong-arming me on a text message to tell me that I need to go to auction. I said, I have 3 more hours.
All day.
This is the only time that I'm allowed to do a 45-minute segment. Normally it's 3 minutes and I have to move on and wrap it. So I will start with you, Kavita, and just give you a moment to give your final thoughts.
I'll be brief. I think we have an opportunity to kind of invert the hierarchy of what I think has been perceived expertise, kind of to that point of always having this be about the legal battle of Roe v. Wade and having it seem like so kind of out there. And if we invert kind of that hierarchy and have like radical change, both personal change so that people can find the stories, make the connections, but also institutional kind of reversal of the hierarchies, with organizations like Saving Mothers kind of toppling in the pyramid, I think that we have incredible power. So I'm very optimistic, despite some of what I know is initial doom and gloom.
Cecile.
Well, I think I already said you have to run like a lot of TV, Yasmin. So that's if you do that, tell these stories. But I do. So yeah, good. We got that done. I guess the only point I would make in addition, maybe a slightly different from what Joyce said, I think the Supreme Court is paying attention. I think that there are members of the Supreme Court, probably Chief Justice Roberts, who are worried about the public perception. Otherwise, they wouldn't all be out on this publicity tour about how they're not political. So I do think we can't underestimate the power of whether it's going to a march, whether it's calling your member of Congress, whether it's going to Washington, whether it's showing up at your state legislature. I just think it's, we can't all do everything. But I think the biggest danger to me is that we argue the Mississippi case December 1st and that nothing happens, and that the decision comes down in the spring and there's crickets. So it's critically important. This is at least in the US, we are a pro-choice country, but we better start acting like it and showing it because people are watching.
Joyce?
Something that has struck me throughout my professional career is how powerful it is to marry up the legal and political sectors with public health. I had a phenomenal experience doing that in Alabama in the area of opioid addiction, and that's work that continues today. And the relationships that we build when we work together are strong. And so I think I would just say this: if we will continue to find ways to bring women with different expertise and different professional work together, we will find solutions because we are smarter, we are stronger, and we are here to stay. And ultimately, despite how discouraging the landscape is, I find myself to be surprisingly optimistic at the prospect of getting together with women and getting the work done.
Tara?
I mean, I think I've said a lot of what I wanted to say, but I think we need some novel, some new ideas in addition to kind of the storytelling and the narratives. I think we need like broad-based marketing. I think we need new campaigns. I think we need to bring everyone along. I think we need to bring the children along. I think the children support women's health across the spectrum as well. Everybody wants a healthy mother. The mother is the center of the family, so I think I think we just need to do all things in all ways to just keep the conversation going.
Rest assured, I tell my boys every day, mommy is number one.
Support mommy in all ways.
No matter what, mommy is number one. That was just the most brilliant panel. I've learned so much. I feel so thankful I was able to sit with you guys for 40 minutes. I wish we were able to do it in person. Maybe next year we can, but my gosh.
I just have to say the chat has so many great ideas, by the way. I wish we could read them all, but I didn't want this to be like a 2-hour segment, but there are so many. Look, Stephanie just says, have men tell their stories about pregnancy and abortion. Brilliant.
Yeah, that's a good one.
You never hear men.
And Kavita wrote, even though Kavita is part of the panel, she wrote, write op-eds, run for office, lift women up with you, lift women up around you and with you. That's good too. But I'm so thankful that we had this chat. I hope everybody enjoyed it. It was such a enlightening and just, I think, much needed chat that we could kind of lift each other up and figure out the goals that we have in order to rise up and move forward. But with that, we also need to raise money on behalf of women and the organization. So I will bring in the money lady, Contessa Brewer, Emmy award-winning journalist from CNBC, who will kick things off.
Yasmin, here's my idea. I have people that I love very much who are anti-abortion. They're also anti-vaccine and anti-government mandated masks or company mandated masks. So when I talk to them, I say, so you don't want the government to tell you what to do with your body. Is that right? Right. Well, now you know how women in Texas feel. And I hope that you'll stand up for them. Actually, COVID gives us a great opportunity to talk about this in a way that is meaningful to people who just want government out of their lives when it comes to COVID. And, when Cecile was saying earlier how politicized this has been, we can have those conversations with people who think they believe one way, but if you turn the coin a little bit and you you offer them a little bit of a different perspective, it might change. Who wants to go shopping? Shopping is one of my favorite things to do. Are you ready for this? I want to know how many of you watching have women in your life, friends or family, who got an ultrasound during pregnancy. All right, now how many women do you know who have never had an ultrasound? At La Maternidad in the Dominican Republic, many mothers who come for care go their whole pregnancy without an ultrasound. But in May, Saving Mothers delivered the first Butterfly IQ portable ultrasound to our partners at La Maternidad. A simple ultrasound just revolutionizes the care that women receive. For instance, one of the first patients seen in the outpatient clinic after we delivered the ultrasound is Carla. She was in her last trimester, pregnant with her third child. She'd had 2 previously uncomplicated pregnancies, both delivered at home. So she came in, she had some light spotting. And then they used the Butterfly IQ portable ultrasound to image the pregnancy. And what they saw, her placenta was really low. It was covering the cervix, that little spot on the birth canal. This condition is called placenta previa. It's a contraindication to natural labor. That means Carla would require a C-section. And if they hadn't found out about the placenta previa and decided to go home to deliver again, she almost certainly would have risked severe bleeding. That could have put her life in danger and her baby's life in danger. So having this ultrasound in the clinic saved Carla's life and many, many more. What we want to do is we want to donate more ultrasound so that we can expand access across all of the clinics that we partner with. I mean, people, $2,100 to save Carla's life and the life of her baby. It's almost nothing. So if I can coax you, any one of you, into buying, that's right, you're bidding on an ultrasound that you do not get to keep, you're going to send it home. And home means to Guatemala or Dominican Republic or to Kenya. You're going to send it to a place that desperately needs an ultrasound. Does anybody want to raise their hand on Q&A and say, yes, me, I am going to buy today an ultrasound? To tell you the truth, I don't have my Q&A up or my chat. And normally, if we were in an auction situation, can you pop me back up so that I'm on camera here? If we were in an auction situation, I would make eye contact with each of you. And I would say, listen, can you please, you right there standing in the corner, how about you? Can you buy a portion of the ultrasound? Could you go in and buy half of it? But because we're all scattered around, I can't do that. Let me just tell you, this auction remains up and running even after we're done here. So if I can't twist your arm and coax you into buying an ultrasound for the Dominican Republic, look at this, Kavita. Thank you so much. Kavita has now said, sign her up for an ultrasound. We'd like to have 5 of these to equip our medical partners in underserved communities. If that doesn't appeal, perhaps we could move on to travel. Now that borders are reopening and COVID restrictions are ending, perhaps you are looking for the perfect post-COVID getaway. Instead of wine and pasta in Italy, how about a bid on an exclusive spot on one of the Saving Mother medical missions? Go on a global site. This goes for $5,000, chump change really, when you're talking about, I'd like to call it a once in a lifetime experience, except that if you go and you witness firsthand the work that Saving Mothers does, perhaps you'd sign up in every subsequent year to go along. I mean, who knows? It might inspire somebody to go and get their medical degree. $5,000 will buy you a spot on one of these missions to the Dominican Republic, to Guatemala, or to Kenya, an experience you will never forget, where not only may you witness the work, you likely would get called into action where every set of hands, I believe, is needed on these missions. So this is an incredible opportunity. Again, I open it up to the floor. It's very hard for me that I can't see your faces and see who's like waffling. $5,000, it's a lot of money, but you would spend that going to an all-inclusive, say in the Dominican Republic. So what about spending it to go to the Dominican Republic and help save mothers' lives? $5,000. Again, the auction stays up and running even when I'm done talking. Not everything does and lasts that long. All right, I want to talk to you about the Save a Mother High Risk Fund. All right, this is a fund that was started, an emergency fund for high risk pregnancies, deliveries, and postpartum care. So in Guatemala, for instance, a $250 donation covers the ambulance transport. If you can't pay, they don't bring you. You could help cover the blood that you have to buy if your family doesn't have a unit to donate. And it directly supports high-risk patients in a safe pregnancy, a smooth delivery, a priceless opportunity to watch their children grow up. I myself had a high-risk pregnancy with my twins. But before they were born, I was pregnant with a baby that I had paid a lot of money and went through a lot of intervention to try and have. And myself ran into a medical emergency and needed high risk intervention. And I got it because I have health insurance, because I have means. My company, at the time I was anchoring for MSNBC, they even offered to pay to have an ambulance transport me from a lower Manhattan hospital to the best hospital in the city for high risk birth. So having those options brought home to me what it would be like if women don't have access, if they don't have resources, if they can't afford it. This is something that you could buy now. We're offering up 100 slots, but really any amount to Saving Mothers helps these high risk situations where mothers can die. And what we know, what the research shows, is that if mothers die, their children are less likely to grow up to adulthood. That in a lot of these countries, if the mother dies, the children go hungry, they're less likely to be educated, and that sets up for a cycle of poverty and despair. Jill Sheffield, she would like to support one high risk, Save a Mother High Risk Fund. Thank you so much, Jill, for signing up for that and for pledging for that. Would anybody else like to raise their hand right now and say, I would like to help save a mother who's at high risk because of her pregnancy and help save her life? I'll give you another moment here before we move on to the auctioning of the uterus. Carla, thank you so much for donating to Save a Mother's High Risk Fund. We really appreciate it. I'm just kidding. You don't get to bid on a uterus or fallopian tubes or ovaries. I think I even see the cervix right there. I'd like to have a pointer so that we could talk about the cervix and the importance in what, Yasmin, is that you want to save a mother high risk or you want to bid on the uterus? Because having another uterus is always a good idea. All right, this is actually an IUD. With the IUD, it's really key to women's equality, something we were talking about tonight, having control over your own reproductive system, deciding when you want to have children and how you want to have children. Globally, the lack of accessibility to birth control, among other factors, of course, has limited women's control over family planning. One of the nurses at our Saving Mothers Health facility in Kenya said, teenage pregnancy is one of the biggest challenges at our facility, that they need more IUDs. They need a form of long-acting, reversible, and discreet contraception that can be offered to women as an opportunity to control their bodies and their futures. If women have an IUD, it makes some of these other issues about abortion, about high-risk pregnancies, about not being able to afford the babies, it makes that irrelevant. $100 can help a woman decide her own fate and the fate of her family. It's $100. Think about this. One night on the town, you go out in New York City, you buy a dinner, it's $100. This is an opportunity to help an entire family and to affect the future for an entire family. Can I see on Q&A who is willing to sponsor Lisa Gilligan, thank you so much. Lisa's going to sponsor 5 IUDs, and we really appreciate that. All right, let's go to the next slide now. Empower Kit. Saving Mothers was founded, of course, as an organization of doctors and these professionals who work with governments. They work with local organizations to improve maternal health care and reduce maternal mortality in very limited resource settings. Initially, the work was focused in Kenya, in the Dominican Republic, and Guatemala. However, you got to take care of your own neighbors. We are seeing shockingly high levels of maternal mortality right here in the backyard. So the Saving Mothers team embarked in an initiative, Empower. I mean, think about this. The US is the only industrialized nation where maternal mortality rates are rising. Black moms are 3 to 4 times more likely to die of pregnancy-related causes than white mothers. And this racial divide is so stark in New York City, where Black moms are 12 times more likely to die in childbirth or in pregnancy than white mothers. These Empower kits contain a digital blood pressure cuff, Fitbit, compression stockings, and culturally appropriate information on how to use the items, how to monitor your health, and reduce those common risk factors, including obesity, hypertension, and diabetes, which contribute to the deadly complications we see. Just a little story here. Joyce, a mom in Queens, had a history of gestational diabetes in her previous pregnancy. And then she got one of these Empower packages. She used the Fitbit. She got her goal of 10,000 steps a day. And she says that activity kept her mental state level during pregnancy. It prevented her from developing diabetes. All around a good thing. Again, $100 for this Empower kit to help your neighbors. So one dinner, think about foregoing one dinner at a fancy New York restaurant and putting it toward there. Terry, thank you so much. Family is sponsoring an Empower kit. I encourage you all, please go to the auction and decide how you can help. Again, any of these items are available even after our auction and our evening has ended tonight. Who wants a bulb syringe? If you've been a mom, you know they are so sexy, sexy. Pull the snot out, blow it into the garbage. But our Kenya team says they are desperately needed. These bulb syringes are used to clear the nose and mouth of newborns and help them breathe. So in this case, something so simple, again, helping to preserve a family, helping to save a life. 10 bulb syringes, $5 a pop. Can someone right now tell me they're willing to sponsor a pack of 10 bulb syringes and send them to our team in Kenya? It's something that is so simple and yet so necessary. We just take it for granted that we can run out to the local Walgreens, Duane Reade, Rite Aid, CVS, and pick up a bulb syringe for a few bucks. But in this case, it can mean the difference between an easy birth and just pulling all of that mucus out of a baby's airway and not. $50 for a pack of 10. And again, we'd like to sponsor 50 of those for our team in Kenya. So we'd like to send 500 of those to Kenya. I'll buy a pack of bulb syringes. In fact, you know what? I'm going to buy 2. So 20 bulb syringes on Contessa Brewer. How about a pack of pregnancy tests? Once again, these are an essential part of a woman's reproductive care. In Guatemala, before undergoing a gynecologic surgery, Maria Carmen was found unexpectedly to be pregnant. If they had continued with the surgery without that critical piece of information, Maria Carmen would have been at incredibly high risk of losing the pregnancy. So again, it's not just about giving a woman early knowledge and early information. These pregnancy tests can also be vital to helping a doctor decide, should there be an X-ray? Should there be a surgery? How do we proceed from now? $100 buys you a pack of 100 pregnancy tests, $1 per pregnancy test. Can I see anyone raising their hand on the Q&A who would be willing to sponsor a pack of 100 pregnancy tests to send for Kenya? Give you just a minute here to think about this. $100 for a pack of 100 pregnancy tests. And then, of course, 4 COVID safety kits. This is the most, thank you, Stephanie, for that. We really appreciate a pack of pregnancy tests. The COVID safety kits are the most requested item right now by all of our sites. It includes personal protective equipment. It includes hand sanitizer, which have proven vital in keeping these communities safe during the pandemic. All the donations made honor Doña Amelia, one of our Saving Mothers School of Power students in Guatemala, who recently passed away from COVID-19. Hopefully, with vaccinations and with proper preventive care, we're going to see these infections suppressed. But if you look at what's on here, that personal protective equipment, this is, again, super basic protective equipment that we would expect to see in any maternity ward, on any maternity floor, even when it's not a pandemic. Rubber gloves, hand sanitizer, that basic hygiene is so essential, not just because of the spread of COVID, but because basic hygiene helps save lives. Who can raise their hand and tell me that they will sponsor a COVID safety kit? $100 buys 4 of them, complete with the eye protection, the scrubs, the overlay, and the hand sanitizer, as well as the personal protective equipment. Again, a pack of 4 safety kits. On to the next slide, please. Let's go to Meryl. Thank you so much for purchasing the Empower kit. We really appreciate that. And this relates to those Empower kits, in fact. In response to the stark racial disparities in maternal mortality in New York City, Saving Mothers has created this program. Actually, we've been through that Empower kit, but the community health workers as well are central to the mission, because they're helping bridge the gap between underserved women and providers, that our training enhances this community health workers' ability to bridge that gap. So in order to go out and train these community health workers, we're asking for sponsors. We'd like 100 sponsorships at $500 a pop. This pays for all of the training for these community workers to go out and receive the training, high-level training, to go out in these extremely high-risk communities right here in New York City and improve the education and the information available to expectant mothers. $500 will help train those community healthcare workers. If you'd like to sponsor one of these trainings, you can sign up right on the website from the auction. There's the link, you see it. It will stay up and running. And you can see on the right-hand part of your screen the training for a comadrona. A lot of women in Guatemala are giving birth outside the hospital, and they use traditional birth attendants to assist them. The School of Power is one of Saving Mothers' longest standing programs that trains traditional birth attendants on the skills they need to ensure a safe delivery, how and when they need to address complications. In other words, when do you need to send a mother at home to a hospital, and how do you get them there? It gives them the sign. And in fact, one of the most remarkable things about this is they'll put out a pictogram on a card for these traditional birth attendants who may not even be able to read, to tell them when to send a mother to the hospital because her pregnancy has had unforeseen complications. On November 5th of this year, Casa Materna Adelan in San Juan Laguna, Guatemala, celebrated its 5th anniversary. This birthing center was started by 5 of our first School of Power graduates, and beyond safe deliveries, they give back by holding training sessions to teach others in the community. It's really incredible to see how the work has been critical, changing the rates of maternal mortality within this indigenous community. If you would like to sponsor the training for a comadrona, you can do so now for $1,000. And remember, one person, this is like the essence of not just giving a man a fish, but teaching him how to fish. You train one of these comadronas, And then the knowledge, the information, and the care can reach dozens or even hundreds of others within these communities. It pays dividends. You know, in CNBC, we say the return on investment is very real and very concrete for this. $1,000 for a Comodrona. And now the postpartum hemorrhage cart. And I've saved this in part for the last because I want to tell you my personal story. And you can see it now, but I really would like you to let the slide go now so that people can see my face when I'm telling you a story that has affected me deeply. I told you about my son, who I was so excited to be pregnant with and to be expecting because we'd been through, I think at that point it was 11 rounds of intervention. It was the third round of IVF that I got pregnant with baby James. And on week 20, I had unexpected bleeding. I was actually at work at MSNBC and started bleeding a lot. And the baby was coming. And I was sent to the hospital. And through just really miraculous intervention, one of my doctors, who's been instrumental in saving mothers, saved my baby. And it was a remarkable experience. It was truly a miracle. And again, partly it happened because I'm a woman of means, because I have an education, because I wouldn't take no for an answer. I asked for a second opinion. I wasn't taking the end of my pregnancy as doctrine. He sent me home on bed rest. And when I came home, I imagined all I was losing by not being able to have a home birth. I watched that Ricky Lake documentary and cried because I knew at that point that was not going to be in my future. And on week 23, I started having contractions and I went back to the hospital. And they said, you know, you're going into delivery. Two things that were important about that. My doctor said, you have to make a decision right now. And he looked at my husband and he said, and if this is my wife, we would terminate this pregnancy because your wife's life is in danger. And I was furious. Like, this is not his decision. This is my decision. I'll make the decision. And we're not terminating. And I understand that my life is at risk, but we're not doing it. And the second thing he said is, if we terminate this pregnancy, you have to make the decision now, because in 3 days, we will no longer be able to make the decision. That decision will be out of our hands, meaning I was up against a government issued time constraint on when I could have an abortion. Although they never really use the word abortion when you want the baby and when it's tragic that it's coming down. I decided to hold on and hope for a miracle. But in the middle of the night, the contractions kept going and the baby kept coming and the cord was blocking the birth canal. And my son died before he was born. And I think every time I tell this story, I'm gonna cry because the pain is real. The important part of this, and the reason I'm telling you this story, is because as I was holding my sweet baby James in my arms, all of a sudden, there was a rush of people coming into the room. They were all deadly silent. It seemed like 10 people in the room. And I looked up at my husband and his face was gray and grim. And I said to the doctor, who was elbows deep inside of me, Dr. Silverstein, I think you need to explain what's happening right now. And he said, Contessa, you're hemorrhaging. You're losing a lot of blood. We have blood on standby. We may need to do a transfusion, but right now I'm trying to stop the bleeding. I didn't realize it, but there was blood all over the floor. My husband told me later it looked like a war zone. And suddenly in that moment, even though I was holding my baby in the arms, I didn't care anymore. So I handed them off. And at that point, I just looked at my husband and thought, well, I sure hope they get this under control because this is going to suck for him. They had a hemorrhage cart right there. They had the blood products they needed. They had the team of people who knew what they were doing. They saved my life. If I'd been at a home birth or in an indigenous village giving birth with a traditional birth attendant, I would have died for sure. A hemorrhage crash cart saves lives. That hemorrhage crash cart at Mount Sinai Hospital saved my life. What Saving Mothers does is it saves lives. It gives women like me around the country a chance to go on and have babies. Mine haven't come back in yet tonight. It's probably a good thing. I just want to tell you, this is a cause that is so personal to me, because had it not been for that high-level medical intervention in one of the richest cities in the world, I would have died. And I'm here because I got the medical intervention I needed. Anything you can donate to help Saving Mothers on this mission, help somebody like me survive another day, to go on and try to have another family, to go home to her own children that she already has, to go back to her husband, to go back to her mother and her father and her brothers and sisters and her friends. Please, please give what you can to this amazing, amazing organization. Tara?
Thank you so much for that, Contessa. I don't even know how to follow that. Thank you for leading the auction. Thank you for being you. Thank you for being such a wonderful supporter of Saving Mothers. We really, really love and value you. Thank you so much. All right, in addition to Contessa, I wanted to thank all of our fabulous panelists tonight. Thank you all for joining us. Again, I'm sorry we were on Zoom this year. Next year we will be in person where we can be face to face, and I hope you will all join us then. Thank you to our medical and executive boards. And then I just wanted to say a little bit to our sponsors, because I feel very lucky this year that so many companies signed on to sponsor this virtual event. I want to give a special shout out to our Lena Francis Edwards giving level sponsors. They were our highest level sponsors, and those were two companies, Cigna and Hologic, who really, really believe in women's healthcare and services, and really approached us and said, we really love what you do. We want to support you. How can we donate? So I feel super lucky that they supported. And I wanted to also acknowledge all of our other wonderful, fantastic supporters who, by the way, have supported us before. Boston Scientific, Gynesonic, Loop, New York, Metropolitan Hospital, Sarson Funds, Doximity, the Doctors Network, EvoFem, the Fisher Family Foundation, the Gilligan Family Foundation, NYU Grossman School of Medicine, Medtronic, and I think that everyone, hopefully I didn't forget anyone there, but thank you again so much for joining us. Please, please, please follow us at Saving Mothers. And view our auction that Contessa did such a wonderful job showcasing all of our much needed products and equipment. Please support us. We love you all for coming. Have a wonderful, wonderful night. Thank you.